Hola amigos y seguidores del canal del Boticario Mágico. Hoy les traemos algo nuevo, una entrevista con un amigo de nuestro canal y también amigo en lo personal. Se trata del británico Mat Hadfield, quien lleva más de una década viviendo en Japón. La verdadera especialidad de Mat es la necromancia, un tema que suele ser algo temido y no se habla mucho en magia porque hay ciertos temores atávicos que hacen que la gente la evada, pero que Mat ha estado abordando desde hace mucho tiempo y hoy nos comparte su experiencia y en especial sobre el tema de su libro recientemente publicado, Las horas, la katarkai de la higromanteia, libro que ha publicado a través de la editorial Press. Pero antes de comenzar a hablar del tema, me gustaría que Matt nos contara un poco de su historia, cómo es que un británico llega a vivir a Japón y establece su vida en un sitio tan lleno de mitos que nutren tan deliciosamente el imaginario colectivo de la humanidad.
Hi, Andre. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. So, how did I get to Japan? That's a really complicated answer. But I'll give you the short version. In 2008, I graduated from university. I studied film production technology, and yeah, there was no work because it was the beginning of the Lehman shock and the economic crisis which followed. And so I took all the money that I'd saved up, and I think I worked for another 6 months after I graduated. And I went and moved to Japan and found myself a job as an English teacher. And yeah, I was only planning on being here for maybe 1 year or two at the tops before returning to the UK. But I just got so involved and so invested in everything over here, and I fell in love with it, and I just didn't see much of a future for myself in the UK. So I decided to stick my roots down here and continue to learn the language and explore all the different facets of Japanese culture. And yeah, it's just a really amazing place. I absolutely love it. And I think the main reason for that is just that in Japan, magic is still very much alive, although most people wouldn't call it that. But yeah, I think you find most people, they might not be like, straight up religious in the same way that we're religious in the West, but there's this undercurrent of animistic thought which just sort of pervades Japanese culture and Japanese society. And yeah, the gods are very much alive in the trees, the mountains, the rivers, the stars. And yeah, I just couldn't help but fall in love with it. Yeah, I can't see myself returning to the UK anytime soon. I think I'm going to stay here for the long run.
Matt, cuéntanos por favor, ¿qué te lleva a escribir este libro? ¿Cuál es el objetivo, lo que deseas darle a su lector?
So, what led me to write this text? That's a really good question, Andre. Thank you for asking. The real purpose of this book is, in a way, to sort of put the hygromanteia in its place in our modern understanding and our modern conceptualization of the grimoire tradition. The hygromanteia itself is sort of a proto grimoire in that it looks like a grimoire, but it's really it's quite primitive by comparison to a lot of others in some ways, in that it's really the first such type of text as we would consider a grimoire in the European tradition. Um, it has a very broad date in that some scholars believe that it was formulated in and around the 6th century, which makes it sort of it makes it a contemporary document, really, with the later document, the later parts of the Greek magical papyri. But it spends quite a lot of time sort of formulating and coming into itself. So really, the text that we have access to, the version of the hygromanteia that we have access to, now comes from the 14th century, after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and then all this literature, all this material, sort of transmits itself into Italy and then into the rest of Europe. The hygromanteia itself, though, is very much concerned with types of magic which we can classify in many ways as Greco-Egyptian in some ways. But we also see this interesting injection of magical techniques and technologies and philosophy from the Near East, with its real interest in astrology and talisman making. So, as a document, the hygromanteia is really the very beginning of this blending of these two concepts. So we see this document itself go on to, in effect, become what we know today as the Key of Solomon. And without the hygromanteia, we wouldn't have this key. So we wouldn't have this tradition of talisman making, and we wouldn't have the, say, like the planetary hours and that side of things as integral components of the grimoire tradition as we understand it today. So the hygromanteia itself has this focus on timing, and it has this focus on the planetary hours, and each hour is assigned a set of spirits, which in the document are referred to as the angel and the demon. And we see this sort of same technology, this same sort of thwarting angel system sort of replay later on in the later European magical tradition. Um, but the way in which these binaries are sort of presented here aren't so much in the same vein as punishing spirits. Although there are some aspects of that present, but I think it's really important that we don't look at this as maybe say like Dr. Rudd, who very specifically would castigate lesser spirits and demons by conjuring an angel first, which was associated with it. These angels and demons are part of what we refer to as the aerial region, or the sublunar sphere. And there's very little difference between, very little moral difference between angel and demon. And I highlight this a lot throughout the text, that many of these quote unquote angels are really anything but. And the demons are often older gods which have been maligned and sort of transformed into demons later on. And so these lists of the hours, of which there is one set of spirits for every hour of every day of the whole week, um, are essentially throughout all of the documents that we have in existence corrupt. They're broken to some degree. Some of the documents are far better and preserved a lot more, but they have these massive holes in them, or lacuna. They have these big regions inside them which just are missing information. So what I've done is I've attempted as best as I can to correct these corruptions and fill in the lacuna, and put all of these names together in a way which sort of completes the lists in a way that a modern magician or a modern sorcerer today can apply this information to their work and have far more confidence that the spirits of the hours that they're working with are correct and not broken. So the main impetus to write this book was that. But on top of that, I also really wanted to focus on many of these ideas and concepts which are being transmitted from ancient Greece and from Hellenic Egypt. So I've really done my best to sort of focus on some of the key components, key aspects of the style of magic that was being used by these people, and how we see this type of magic evolve and be transmitted through time through textual documents such as the Greek magical papyri the Coptic texts, and all the way up to the magical treatise of Solomon and the Hygromanteia, which is really, it finds itself located in the Byzantine Empire. And that location itself is really important because it's this bridging point between Southern Europe and the Near East. And that's why it's this massive melting pot location of cultures and magical techniques and ideas all coming together, which produce this document. And then finally, the Eastern Roman Empire collapses, and all of this information moves into Europe, and then it's disseminated out from that point onwards. And then we see this huge transformation in, say, like the hierarchy of the spirits. We see this massive evolution in demonology and the sort of the hierarchy of hell. And yeah, the book itself is sort of following this fluid evolution, and the purpose of this really is to show that the grimoires aren't monolithic objects. They're not set in stone. They evolve, they change, they grow with time and with human culture. And so I think really the subtext, or my intended subtext of the book, really is to sort of highlight that we aren't trapped and stuck using the grimoires as they were in, say, the 16th century, the 17th century, the 18th century. We can evolve, we can grow, we can shift, and we can find new expressions, new ways of working with these systems, which reflect the modern day, which reflect our modern cultures and societies. And so, yeah, for instance, when we find materia that is just absolutely inaccessible to us in the modern day, even something simple to people who were writing the grimoires in the 16th and the 17th centuries, like goat skin, for instance, is just impossible, really, for the average person to find today. So we can adapt, we can grow. I know there are a lot of instances in the grimoires where, for instance, we see this repetition of the old. Um, for instance, there's the idea of the reed pen, which would have made no sense to a European in the 17th century to use that on vellum, but it would make perfect sense for an Egyptian or a Greco-Egyptian priest to be using a reed pen on papyrus. So yeah, there are aspects which maintain this older is better attitude, but then at the same time, we see this evolution and this growth and these change, especially in the names of the spirits and the locations in which they're called from, and their place in the internal hierarchies of the grimoires themselves. So yeah, the major impetus that I have really with this text is to sort of highlight all of those ideas, to spark the reader's imagination, and to sort of give people that permission to be more creative, to expand the work, to evolve it, to grow it, and yeah, to sort of to push the grimoire tradition forward. It's about time that we started to innovate again. We have enough information today to recreate these processes, to get results with these processes. And so, yeah, we know as well that the magician, the sorcerer, they can get results with these older texts, and we can communicate with them, with the spirits, in specific ways. So let's learn from them, as opposed to simply just calling them only because we want to get, paid or laid. We have this opportunity right now, given all the information that's available, that we can start to bring all these texts back together again into a new synthesis. We have this ability to start to put these ideas back together, and this is a really unique and personal endeavor. And so, yeah, this is sort of my way of inviting the reader to get working on that, to start producing that sort of innovation once again.
La higromanteia es un texto bastante clásico y muy poco abordado por los autores actuales. Cuéntanos, ¿cuál es la base conceptual de la hemerología?
Yeah, the hygromanteia isn't really talked about a lot in modern contexts, which is a shame because it's really the core of the tradition, or at least it's a massive part of the core of the tradition. There are other examples, there are other sources which we could also address and we could also get into, but yeah, the hygromanteia plays this massive role. It's where we see the hours come from. It's where we see like spiritual hierarchies of hell. We see the kings, the emperors, and many of these concepts they survive almost entirely all the way through into, say, the blue grimoires of the French, the little French grimoire tradition, like the grimoire in Verum, um, which has almost identical hierarchy. It has Astaroth, Beelzebub, and Lucifer. It has all of these same components. But of course, it's been evolved and it's changed over time, and there are all these innovations which have been, you know, slowly added to it over time, over the intervening centuries. So of course we see it become a little bit more pedestrian. We see a lot of corruption come into it. We lose a lot of information, and we see this like oversimplification in many ways. Now, I'm not saying that those simplifications are bad, because they're not. They're clearly people have practiced this and used it and gotten results, and this is how the text has evolved. But what we can do is we can cast our eye back in history to the actual source document and work out why those things are important. So we understand why specific timings are become important. And there's this undercurrent of astrology which is essentially missing wholesale from the grimoires, other than saying, cut your wand under a waxing crescent moon on a Wednesday. Now, why do we need to do those things? That's what the hygromantia sort of fills in. That's where those blanks are. And on top of that, you get to learn the names of the spirits which are active in those hours. And it introduces the sorcerer to the wider ecological system in which the grimoires are positioned. So it's not just that my grimoire does X, Y, and Z. All the grimoires have access to this spirit realm, this spirit magic. And we have this window through the hygromantia to sort of understand why that works and the way in which it works. So yeah, by reconstructing this system as I've laid it out here, um, we really get this fantastic opportunity to reassess why we do things, the way in which we do things, and then ultimately like innovate on why these things are done. If we understand the process and we understand the reasoning, then we can make our own choices. We're not beholden to simply, following a pattern by rote simply because it was written in a book. So, hemerology is defined as a method of divination that is common to civilizations worldwide, linking the outcome of events to the occult nature of the times at which these events occur. Specific units of time, such as seasons, months, days, or hours, were thought to have hidden, intrinsically auspicious or inauspicious qualities that influenced the outcome of actions undertaken and events taking place during these periods. So, Japan, for instance, where I live, has this system of hemerology apply to day life. We have specific days where it's very fortunate to get married, or it's very unfortunate to apply for a job. And all of this information can be found easily on any calendar. So, hemerology is a system of, how would I best put it? knowing when to best apply something. So knowing when best to do an action. When is the most fortuitous time? When is the most auspicious time to take a test, to apply for work, or, you know, to ask a girl out on a date? All of these things can be timed using the position of the moon and in relation to the stars. So this concept of hemerology, as we understand it in Japan, also applies to many, many other cultures around the world, most notably really is China. But we had this system in the West that was alive and well at one point in history, especially during the thriving period of the Byzantine Empire. And this system went into the magical practices of the time, and they were recorded in texts such as the Hygromanteia, which went on to be the foundational component of many of the grimoires in the European tradition. This system of hemerology, as we understand it, as I've just described it, though, has been lost. We don't do these things in the West anymore. Maybe we have a vague understanding that, you know, the sun is in this sign, so this is a good time for X, Y, and Z. And those things can be applicable. We can still use those, but the underlying system of a hemerology is missing. And the most common hemerology that we find throughout culture is a lunar-based hemerology, which is, what is the moon doing? Where is the moon? Um, is it waxing? Is it waning? What mansion is it inhabiting? And all these things. So we can now, with the information that we have today, given all the work of, you know, the scholars, all the scholars that have put all this effort into reproducing these texts, translating texts, and putting them out there for people to get their hands on, we can now refashion a new Western hemerology uh, founded on ancient ideas, these really old concepts, and sort of we have to experiment and rebuild this. We have to put it back together and work out what we need and what we don't need, and how best we can proceed from this point, and uh, yeah, really utilize these concepts to enhance our magic, as opposed to feeling that, oh, you know, all this astrological timing is so boring, you know, I have to wait for so many months before this perfect time arrives. You know, we can simplify that down to just, where is the moon and what is it doing? And we can start to not be so bound up and bogged down by these more complicated astrological concepts, and start to have fun with it. You know, start to have more freedom and ability to engage with spirit, to engage with the spirits which inhabit time as much as they inhabit place, and start to experiment. Really, that's the goal. The goal here is experimentation, and and hemerology is really the core concept that I'm trying to re-enliven into our tradition from the hygromantia. And the best way to describe this is through using the Greek word katarkai, inaugurations. So the idea of beginnings and working out when is the best time to cast your spell, when is the best time to conjure this spirit, when is the best time to perform an operation of scrying. All of these ideas can be summed up in this concept of inauguration, or katarkai, um, which is described as the initiatives, the beginnings, and it's used to determine the best time to start a particular action, both mundane or magical. And I think that's the most important part of this, is that you don't necessarily have to have all of the ritual tools, you know, the circle, the incense, you know, you don't need to memorize these massive long conjurations and all these ideas which have become synonymous with with grimoire practice and conjuration. Instead, what you're doing is you're becoming familiar with time, and you're becoming you're becoming familiar with the spirits which inhabit it, and then you're utilizing your understanding of time to begin things in their most fortuitous or their most auspicious moment. And yeah, then we sort of drop all of the ceremonial stuff to one side, and we sort of become embedded within this larger ecology of time and spirit, in which actions and our behaviors sort of commingle with the world. You know, we reach this interesting consciousness where we're no longer specifically trying to effectuate change on reality from our, our a lonely island, and instead we're becoming part of the universe. We're becoming one with it. We're becoming part of this flow of time, and engaging with it through myth in specific locations, such as the crossroads, or within a circle, or in a graveyard, or these liminal locations. And on top of that, we find that time itself is, as well, is this liminal location, in a way. Mythic time, it's by specifically deciding to work in, let's say, the at dawn, on the day of Mars, in the hour, the hour of Mars under a waxing moon. Then we are engaging in the myth that also accompanies that time, and that accompanies that space.
Entonces estamos hablando de una práctica básicamente medieval, pero que tiene antecedentes primero en las herejías medievales.
Yeah, you're right. This is a medieval text, or more specifically, it's a collection of medieval texts, which would have all been circulating around the Eastern Mediterranean, between the 6th century and the 14th. But yes, there are some components of this magic, which have their antecedents in the medieval heresies of the East, specifically the Bogomil heresy, which is, I think it's a 10th century Gnostic movement, or neo-Gnostic movement. And I can't go into it in too much detail because there's a lot, but the basic concept of what I've uncovered, or I think I've uncovered here, is that many of the names that we find in the spirit lists, specifically in the angels, of the hours, they tend to come from a collection of non-canonical biblical texts, which were favored by these heresies, specifically the Bogomils. One such spirit, which I do go into in quite a bit of detail, is Sataniel, who is Satan, but with his L suffix still attached. Um, when I say non-canonical, that's a big subject in and of itself, because many of these quote unquote non-canonical texts are still considered canonical in certain places of the world. So, for instance, Ethiopia still considers many of these texts canon, and includes them in their versions of their Bibles, whereas, say, a Northern European maybe hasn't even heard of these texts before. So the idea of canon is a rich and detailed and complicated story. But what we're doing here really is exploring how these Christian heresies and the surviving magical documents that we have from roughly the same geographical region sort of had influences on each other. Um, Although it was probably more likely that um, the Christian heresies were having the influence on the magical texts. So the individuals who made up these communities, such as the Bogomils, would have hidden their sacred concepts and texts in magical literature, for instance, because it was in those hidden places where they could survive. And one of the most fascinating of these ideas is this alternative story of Genesis, which we find, say, in 2 Enoch, and also in the extra canonical biblical text 3 Baruch, where we find this entirely novel retelling of the Genesis story. This whole new cosmogonic account where the actual events within diverge wildly from what we are very much used to in the West. And one of the primary characters involved in this retelling of the Genesis story is Sataniel. Now, this character was really important to the Bogomils. He was essentially the counterpart of Jesus Christ. And he is then presented in the higromanteia as an angel. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that the generic conception of what an angel is not Satan himself. So we see this really interesting window into how people in this era thought. And the angels and the demons that were being engaged with, consorted with by magicians and by sorcerers were not the angels of the celestial spheres. They were not the, happy rainbows, shining light type of angels. We're talking about fallen angels very specifically. And these fallen angels have their demonic counterparts. So when we working with these regions of time, we shouldn't be we shouldn't be obsessed or concerned with this idea of a binary good and evil sort of concept between the two words as we use them in the text. So that it's not that the good angel thwarts the evil demon. It's that the fallen angel and the demon are a unit, they're a pair, they come together, they have a specific coherence that works well together. And when conjured in unison, they open that region of time for the magician to utilize in whichever way they see fit, be it making a talisman or conjuration of spirits or spell work or whatever it is that you're choosing to do. But yes, to go back to the main point, it is a series of medieval texts, yes, and there was a significant amount of influence from these Christian heresies, which went into the structure, the hierarchy of time, which is found within hygromantia.
Entiendo. Entonces hablamos de una práctica sumamente antigua llegando hasta Egipto de los Ptolomeos en un salto histórico bastante amplio, por lo que en el fondo has hecho un trabajo de investigación muy extenso. ¿De cuántas páginas hablamos aproximadamente?
Yes, the many of the ideas that I discuss in this text are drawing parallels between the later uh, Byzantine magical practices and the Hellenic Greek practices. Now, a lot of these ideas are very similar, but it's also really important to underscore that just because they look the same doesn't necessarily mean they are the same. So what we can do though is we can look for very specific kinds of magical technologies or magical practices which seem to have run unbroken through that period of time. And one of these ideas is the idea of guardian spirits that rule over specific hours of the day. So in the PGM or the Greek magical papyri, we find instances of spirits which rule over the 12 hours of the night. And we find other spirits which are given animal forms which are applied to hours of the day. Now, like I said, these ideas look very similar, but they're not necessarily the same. Now, it might just be that there are spirits which rule over the hours of the day and night, and that each culture discovers these spirits anew again by themselves. But what we can do, though, is we can say the spirit names that are being used have some similarities to the original cultures from which this technique or this process arrives from. Now, the names themselves, the actual specific names themselves, are wildly different, completely different. But what we do find is we find names of Greek gods in this list, or Greek monsters and titans and other, other spirits, like for instance Typhon, who is specifically referred to as Typhonel for one of the hours of the day. He's also an angel, much like Sataniel is also an angel. And again, when you think of Typhon, you don't think of an angel, generally speaking. So this is this idea that there's a connection through history back to this point in time. Yeah. Um, Another idea is the directionality or cardinality. So you'll find throughout the Middle European grimoires this really big focus on which direction you're facing. The East is generally considered to be the one of the main direction. It's where the sun rises, and so you find a lot of descriptions of talismans being made at dawn, because it's that first light of the sun as it as it goes over the ascendant, and the planets that are in the sky at that time are all very important. So you find that these astrological concepts are transmitted, but astrology as we understand it today has evolved and has changed so much as well. So again, a one-for-one similarity is very difficult to make, but what I've uncovered is more of this importance to the direction of the north in the PGM, and then into the grimoires, as well as this really big focus that we find on the number seven. And we can look to these ideas of seven and the north to the stars, and we can find, for instance, that the Ursa Major and Draco and Ursa Minor played this really important part in positioning the sorcerer within the cosmos while they're performing specific kinds of magic in the Greek magical papyri. And this same process occurs throughout the European grimoire tradition as well. And so while we might find that there are seven spirits that are applied to the north in, say, the Book of Oberon, we're never given a reason as to why there are these seven spirits, or what their origins are, or even what they do. We just know that there are seven spirits in the north. And so we can look back to the PGM and we can find examples of these spirits and what they do, what their characters are like, multiple sets of them, in fact. So there are different ways in which different cultures perceived these spirits. And so, like I said before, this is an opportunity for us to recontextualize these in the modern day and explore them once more and find what's changed or what's the same, and to sort of develop that into our magic once more, to breathe life back into that. It's been lost, and it's a region of the sky which is incredibly important. It's the axis upon which the whole cosmos is put into motion. And yeah, there's definitely room there for us to explore and for us to really engage with, and push things forward once more, that so that our systems of magic don't become stale. We need to breathe life back into this. And I think by exploring these regions of the sky and by exploring these regions of time and of liminal space, we can bring something back to um, that practice which has been lost. We'll never know the truth behind it all. We'll never know the exact reasoning, because these things have been lost. They're lost to time. We can never build a time machine to go back and just ask these people why they were doing these things, and what this rationale was. So we're left with jigsaw pieces, but no final picture to compare the pieces to. And on top of that, it's not just one jigsaw. There's a whole bunch of different jigsaw puzzles that have all been mixed in, and we have to separate them as well. And then the picture itself changes through history, so we have to make sure that we're focused on the right period of time, and it gets complicated very, very, very quickly. Um, if if we're trying to produce a modern synthesis, then what we need is an understanding of a rough understanding of why this process was important. But it also implies that we engage magically with these regions ourselves and actually learn and actually communicate with the spirits in these locations and in these times, so that we can begin to formulate something that can work for us again in the future. As for how long the text is, I'm not entirely sure, but it's about 200 pages or so, I guess. Um, I tried very hard to make it as succinct as possible, because I could have made it into another monster. It could have been huge, because I wanted to include absolutely everything in the kitchen sink, all the research that I found, all the discoveries that I made. But I made a very conscious choice at the beginning when I was writing this, that I wanted it to be a slim text. I wanted it to be punchy, and just to communicate the concepts, but without bogging the reader down too much in any too much information, and too much source material for them to go and search as well. But I mean, there is plenty of that in the text, so there's a very well worked out bibliography. So if you do want to go and find all the sources that I cite, you can, and you can put all the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle together if you like yourself. And hopefully, I mean, I invite people to do this. Come and try and do it yourself and see what results you get. What image do you find? Let's do it together, and really work this out. I think it's a good opportunity for us all to participate in something. So I'm excited for people to get their hands on it.
Es interesante, confirmando la idea de que los practicantes de magia orientan su investigación directamente sobre las necesidades prácticas y, claro, algo de amor por los libros antiguos. Ahora quisiera saber, si alguien desea aprender esta técnica, además claro de comprar tu libro que está disponible en Hayden Press, ¿qué clase de materiales necesitará? ¿Son materiales muy caros o se puede llevar a cabo con materiales de bajo costo?
So, like I said before, that there's no immediate necessity that people who are engaging with this kind of magic buy anything. I mean, if you want to engage with the more ceremonial side of it, there are some examples that I've included in the book, and you will need to, say, have developed a grimoire practice. Let's say, as an example, the Grimorium Verum, which is a very popular grimoire. You will need the wands, you'll need a knife, you'll need a circle, an altar, you'll need candles, incenses, and all of that is detailed really extensively in Marathakis's translation of the Hygromanteia, which you can find from Golden Horde Publishing. It's the source work from which I wrote this book. So all of the information that I used can be found within that. It's a little expensive, but it's really well worth having on your shelf, simply just so that you can compare the information in my book to the information in there, and then you can sort of draw your own conclusions, which I really recommend that you do. Um, as for other materials, yeah, nothing really. If you want to, then I just recommend that you develop a set of ritual tools for any system, really, any grimoire, or even if you're working with something modern, say like the Golden Dawn or Thelema, there's nothing stopping you from engaging in this practice either. What it all it really needs is the ability to keep track of the time and to engage with time meticulously. So you should know when the moon is in a specific phase, and you should know which zodiacal sign it can be found in, and you should be able to understand how to prepare for those events, and yeah, so I guess an ephemeris would be something that you should get your hands on, and you should learn how to read. And yeah, even just something simple like a lunar calendar, you can find them online quite easily. But yeah, there's nothing really overly technical about this at all. I'd also really recommend that you get your hands on the Greek magical papyri translated by Betts. If you are interested in that form of magic, I really recommend that you have it to hand, just so that you can again compare it with my book, and you can sort of explore the rituals and the spells within it, and sort of apply your own ideas to them. Really, as for other texts, yeah, whatever the reader is interested in, really, you use this as a form of magic that sort of enhances the magic that you were already doing. So you don't need to learn another system of magic. You just need to incorporate astrology and magical timing more fully into your practice. But that's it, really.
Bueno, amigo mío, no quiero quitarte más tiempo. Sé que tú siempre estás en algún proyecto, siempre tienes algo en mente. Te agradezco toda la información que nos has dado, de seguro a más de algún auditor le puede interesar. Así que en la descripción del video van a encontrar el enlace directo para que puedan hacer un pedido a la editorial.
Thank you, Andre, so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure to explore the ideas that I've written, and to sort of take some time to explain it to you and to your audience. I'm really happy that I've had this opportunity, and yeah, look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Amigos y seguidores del canal del Boticario Mágico, esta ha sido nuestra entrevista con Mat Hadfield, en que nos ha contado sobre su nuevo libro. Esperamos que les haya interesado. Si es así, comenten qué les pareció. También si quisieran que entrevistemos nuevamente a Matt, porque de hecho él tiene otros temas de los cuales nos podría hablar. Por ejemplo, su amplia experiencia en necromancia, que cubre varias formas de trabajo, varias áreas. Asimismo, indíquenos si les gustaría que hagamos entrevistas a otros autores. Cuídense mucho, dennos un like, marquen la campanita para seguirnos si aún no lo han hecho. Y si no lo hacen, bueno, podríamos terminar maldiciéndolos por 54 generaciones a tener un muy mal sexo. Eso, adiós, chao, cuídense mucho y no cometan delitos, chao chao.